Bravery and sacrifice on the Somme, honouring the fallen 100 years on. They gathered at the memorial on the battlefield where more than 1 million men were killed or injured. Soldiers of today read the words of soldiers of the time, evoking the full horror of the fighting.
The whole earth trembled. You could feel the vibrations coming up through the earth, through your limbs, through your body.
Royalty and politicians joined the commemorations, and poppies fell, symbolising the huge number of lives lost. I'm in northern France tonight on a special day of tribute here and across Britain.
Also on the programme, the Chancellor abandons plans for a budget surplus by 2020. George Osborne claims the economy's in shock after the vote to leave the EU. Michael Gove launches his pitch for power, saying he's the candidate for change. And Wales fans prepare for their biggest football match in nearly 60 years.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin in northern France and Charlene White in the studio.
Good evening from northern France, from the Somme, scene of the bloodiest battle in the history of the British Army. It was here 100 years ago this very day so many gave their lives doing their duty for their country. From muddy trenches they climbed to their death, wave after wave mown down by German machine gunners. 10,000 dead within an hour, 10,000 more by nightfall. Today, relatives, royalty and politicians came here to honour their courage and their sacrifice. And first tonight, our senior international correspondent John Irvine reports on how they remembered.
There are certain things that require the highest standard, and this commemoration was one of them. It was impeccably done. The Somme may have disappeared beyond the horizon of living memory, but for 1 hour of ceremonial, the connection with here a century ago seemed close and very real indeed. The first act of remembrance on the Somme today took place at Loch Nagar crater, a gaping wound created by one of several British mines detonated under the Germans just before 7:30 a.m. That was 0 hour, when whistles urged over the top. The main ceremony at the Teep Val Memorial brought together politicians, relatives and royalty. They would listen intently as a distinguished array of storytellers brought to life the anguished voices of 100 years ago.
The writer John Masefield travelled to the Somme battlefield in 1917. It is a place of ruin and death, blown and blasted out of any likeness to any work of man.
Corporal Jim Crow, 110th Brigade, Royal Field Artillery, describes a brief, unofficial truce on the front line. One of our infantrymen was on the German barbed wire, badly wounded. We could see him moving every now and again. In the end, Major Anderton pulled his revolver out, climbed over the parapet, walked straight to this man, picked him up and carried him back. He walked as though he was on parade. The Germans never fired a shot at him as he went. They never fired a shot as he went back. And they cheered him as he lifted the man onto his shoulders.
During a 2-minute silence, there was a gentle cascade of petals, poppies denoting British loss, blue cornflowers, French. There were other flowers laid down in recognition of what has been an indelible mark on the fabric of our nation, that hasn't faded much with the passage of time. Rarely can 100 years ago feel so recent.
Well, in awful contrast to the carnage that was to follow, the Battle of the Somme started in silence. At 7:29 a.m, the British guns stopped firing. Even birds could be heard singing. A minute later, all that changed. Whistles blew and the order came to go over the top of the trenches. The German machine guns that the Allied soldiers thought had been destroyed burst into life, cutting down thousands in no man's land. By the time the battle ended, 141 days later, more than 1 million would lie dead or injured. Well, those dreadful losses aren't just being commemorated here in France today, but also in services across the UK. From serving members of the armed forces to veterans and school children, thousands have been marking the anniversary. Our correspondent Tim Ewart reports now on the day the UK remembers.
In the early light of morning, 5 guardsmen kept the last watch of an overnight vigil at the tomb of the unknown warrior at Westminster Abbey. Outside, the peace was shattered, as it was on the Somme, by the roar of guns. A salute here, not a barrage. And the terrible first moment of battle was recorded in the words of a soldier who was there.
Our trench fairly rocked, and a great blue flame shot into the sky, carrying with it hundreds of tons of earth. The great mine had gone up. It was 7:30, 0 hour.
They honoured the dead in silence across the country. In Manchester, bandsmen marched through the city centre in honour of their forebears. In Exeter, there were 19,240 symbolic shrouds, one for each of the Allied troops killed on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. And everywhere, ghost soldiers, young men in World War I uniforms, to remind us never to forget such a dreadful sacrifice. Back at Westminster Abbey, the lament Flowers of the Forest by Piper Lance Corporal Richie Spence. At 18, he was shot and wounded in Afghanistan. One young soldier playing in memory of so many who died so long ago.
Well, many of those who died on the first day of battle were from units made up of volunteers, friends, colleagues and neighbours from the same towns and cities. The PALS battalions, as they became known, seemed like a good idea, but the large number of casualties all too often devastated communities. I've been to Liverpool, where thousands of men rushed to enlist in the PALS and never came home. In the village of Montauban by the Somme, they've been laying wreaths in memory of 257 men who fought and died here on the first day of battle. It was a rare success for a PALS battalion. They took the village, but it is, of course, the losses that history remembers. These are some of those men marching off to war from their home city of Liverpool in front of St George's Hall. Volunteers, all friends or colleagues, parading with pride and anticipation as the city's new PALS battalion. 100 years on, I've been to the city to find out more about them, their bravery and their sacrifice. So this is a room of honour, really.
Yeah, the Hall of Remembrance inside Liverpool Town Hall. One of the city's hidden gems, this, Mark.
It is in here that it really hits you.
There's almost 14,000 names on these panels now.
The scale of the casualties from this city, so many of them from the Somme, and particularly the appalling first day of battle. A book here lists the deaths of the Liverpool pals from just the 1st of July.
It's just incessant, name after name after name.
All on July the 1st?
All on July the 1st, yeah. 2,800 men who served in the Liverpool pals never made it home. And so you can imagine the effect on the families. You know, fathers, brothers, sons, never coming home had a dramatic effect on the city. Right, we've one here.
He picks out one name here, Private Arthur Sena. This is him, an office worker from a timber firm who joined up with his pals, and who, his nephew tells me, was one of the first over the top and one of the first to die. So 2 years of training and 2 years of preparation, and all over
and 200 yards of battle, if you like. That's all it was. Yeah. It's terrible, isn't it?
Quite a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Peter shows me letters his uncle sent to his mother and fiancée a few days before he was killed. And these were written in the event of my being killed on the battlefield.
I think he had an idea that he mightn't survive. You can gather that from the tone of the letters. Yeah. But I tried to read this letter, the one to his mother, and I couldn't. I got so far, and you think I'm not an emotional person. I can't remember the last time I cried, but I cried reading that letter. Couldn't read it.
So many letters home from so many young men who would never return. The story of Private Arthur Sena. I'm back a little later, but now it's over to Charlene in the studio with the rest of the day's news.
Thanks, Mark. And still to come on the ITV Evening News.
Do you feel betrayed by Mr Gove?
Boris stays silent as Michael Gove launches his pitch to be PM. And can Wales make the semi-finals of Euro 2016? All those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. Michael Gove made his pitch to be Prime Minister, saying he was the candidate for change and was committed to taking Britain out of the EU. But the Chancellor warned the economy was braced for a shock, forcing him to abandon key targets. Boris Johnson, meanwhile, facing awkward questions about whether he'd been betrayed. From Westminster, our Deputy Political Editor Chris Shipp reports.
What would you least want when you leave home on the day after your political career came crashing to the ground?
Absolute disgrace.
Rubbish.
You don't have the guts to sort it out.
Rubbish.
One would be a member of the public giving you personal abuse, and two would be a journalist asking about the man who yesterday wielded the knife.
Do you feel betrayed by Mr Gove?
I cannot, unfortunately, get on with doing what I wanted to do, so it'll be up to somebody else now.
It wasn't turning out to be a great start to the day for Boris Johnson.
Did you betray Boris?
And the man who ended Boris's ambitions in order to promote his own arrived with a hastily written speech this morning to launch his bid to be Prime Minister.
The country voted for no more politics as usual, no more business as usual, and that is why I'm standing as the candidate for change.
He promised to be a Prime Minister who, on immigration, would bring numbers down. And as for that contentious claim, read it here, the NHS would get the £350 million the EU takes every week. It turns out the NHS won't be getting that much after all.
That's why I will take all the steps necessary to give the NHS at least another £100 million per week by 2020.
Meanwhile, the Chancellor, remember him, isn't sticking to his promises either. He had pledged to balance the nation's books by 2020. After the referendum, he says he can't.
And it's incredibly important we maintain fiscal credibility, that we are tough on the deficit while being realistic about achieving the surplus by the end of the decade. That is exactly what our fiscal rules provided for. They explicitly acknowledge the impact of a significant negative shock.
In truth, Mr Osborne was relying on a lot of economic luck to get there, and put simply, that luck ran out last week. Listen to the warning from one of the most respected experts in this area and try not to feel too downbeat.
The economy will be hit, and it will be hit quite hard. I think there is complete unanimity about that, actually, among economists, the Governor of the Bank of England, the Chancellor. We shouldn't pretend that there's not something real and serious going to happen, because there is.
Of course, Michael Gove said during the campaign the people have had enough of experts, so we'd all better hope they're wrong. And it's because of the task in hand that Michael Gove said today that the new Prime Minister needs to be someone who campaigned to leave the European Union. But based on some figures that we have collated, Theresa May, a Remainer, is way out in front. She's got 4 times as many MPs backing her than Stephen Crabb and Michael Gove, who are in second and third place, followed by Andrea Leadsom and then Liam Fox. Next week, those 5 contenders will be whittled down to 4.
Chris, thank you. EasyJet says it won't decide whether to move its legal headquarters out of the UK until Britain's new relationship with the EU is clear. The airlines held preliminary talks with a number of European regulators about relocating. Scientists say the hole in the ozone layer over the Antarctica appears to be getting smaller and could close by the middle of the century. They put the change down to the 1987 ban on chemicals used in refrigerators and aerosols. And Ryan Giggs is set to end his 29 career at Manchester United. The 42-year-old, who made a record 963 appearances for the club, is thought to be leaving as new manager Jose Mourinho takes over. Now, Giggs never actually had the chance to play for his country in a major tournament, but tonight Wales face Belgium for a place in the semi-finals of the European Championships. It's their biggest game for nearly 60 years, and our sports editor Steve Scott is in Lille for us. Steve, how excited are they?
Well, Wales may well be the underdogs, but I think they have much to be optimistic about tonight. Apart from anything else, they can play without fear, having already overachieved in this tournament. Their fans may well be outnumbered inside the stadium, but recent history is on their side, because the last time these two teams met, Wales won. The streets of Lille turned red today, but it isn't just Welsh red, far from it. A short ride from the Belgian border, they've come in their tens of thousands to be here, most of them without a ticket. Outnumbered but undeterred, there's quiet confidence that Wales can prolong their history-making tournament further.
It's just amazing. I mean, it's our biggest game in my history. I mean, I've been following Wales around Europe for years and years. We've never qualified for anything, never mind reached the quarter-final. Incredible.
We've been away for 3 weeks and we don't want to go home, but we're just living the dream, aren't we, darling? Yeah. We're living the dream.
One game away from a semi-final in their first ever Euros is beyond what this team had expected. So much so, Chris Gunter will miss his brother's wedding if they beat Belgium, and he's his best man. As much as anything, they say, it's team spirit that has seen them through.
I think the way we've done it, we've really stuck together as a team. We've worked our socks off. We've run around hard, working on and off the ball, playing good football as well. So a mixture of everything, and yeah, I think we definitely deserve to be here.
If the prospect of a life-changing night ahead was starting to play on their minds, you couldn't tell as the Welsh squad stretched their legs before heading for the stadium. Waiting for them, the noisy Welsh chorus that has accompanied them throughout. One thing you can guarantee is they'll keep singing until there's nothing left to sing about. Steve Scott, ITV News, Lille.
Well, welcome back to northern France as we mark the centenary of the start of the Battle of the Somme. It's here at the Thiepval Memorial where thousands of the missing British and Commonwealth soldiers are remembered. It's a haunting place, and among the many moved by it is Michael Morpurgo, the author of War Horse. On his first visit here, he told Nina Nanar how the tragedy of the Somme is a lesson to us all.
He has often written about the horrors that occurred on fields like these. But this is Michael Morpurgo's first visit to this field, to this memorial to the missing, and it is overwhelming.
The first thing I looked at, I think, was the view of where these soldiers would have got up out of their trenches and gone forward at 7:30 the morning the 1st of July, across towards the German positions, and then thinking this was became this appalling catastrophe of a battle in which 1 million people were to die. And then you look at it now. and you've never seen such a peaceful scene in all your life. You just look at one gravestone and you see unknown soldier. Well, there's someone lying there who was known to someone and loved by someone and is now unknown. And we respect it. We don't know who they are, of course, and never will. But you have a connection, and that connection saddens you.
His books, War Horse, which was adapted into an award-winning play and film, and Private Peaceful, were written after Morpurgo met by chance old soldiers of the war, those who'd lived to tell the tale. And it is his privilege, he says, to be able to keep their tales alive.
I try above all to put myself at the centre of a story and think what it must have been like to walk down that lane off to war, not knowing what to expect at all. You knew you were going to put on uniforms, and probably it was a bit of fun to start with. And then suddenly we're marching down these lanes here towards the Somme, and it really wasn't fun at all. The reason for being here in a way is because it should be a lesson to us all. This is what happens when men go mad, you know. That's what happened in that war. We do look out on a peaceful scene, and that's what's hopeful. And the writing of books and the telling of stories, I think, can help do that. It can help us understand how it was so that we can maybe make it better for the future.
And that's it from Thiepval on the day the sacrifice of so many was remembered. Tom Bradby is back at 10, but from everyone here and Charlene in the studio, bye-bye.